Thank you. Madam Reading Clerk.
First substitute, House Bill 302, Voting Records Amendments, Representative Edwards. This bill was heard in Government Operations with a vote of 7-1 and 1.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So back in 2011 and 2012, I began to work with a group of constituents on this issue of protecting an individual's information that's included on their voter registration record. During those years, we had several discussions in committee, obviously, and there were times when the comment was made when I brought up the possibility of abuse of this information, quote, "It'll never happen. We'll never have that happen. No one would ever buy that and use that information nefariously." Well, in January of 2014, for $1,050, the entire Utah voter database, including 1.5 million people, was published online at a cost of 1/10 of 1 cent per voter. I have in my possession here a copy of each one of you on the floor, the voter registration information for you, just pulled off that, and 74 copies right here. I declined to pass that out over my concern with your personal information, which you may look at and then possibly throw in the garbage, and without any idea of how that would be, taken care of. My concern is for your privacy, but I want you to know that, for instance, I can tell who was born in this body on the 3rd of February in 1956. I can see who was born on the 26th of May, 1971, 9th of October, 1986, who has 7 registered voters in their family, who lives at 111 West, 5600 South, etc. Your voter ID information, your birth date, the date you first were registered in the state of Utah, your party affiliation, every single time you have voted, and your address, all on here for you and every person who lives in your household. When this information got out and I started to hear from constituents over this, first of all, 2 main things. Number one, they were surprised, they were concerned, and then they were angry. They were angry because they felt like the government that they feel like ought to be in a position to protect them has actually sold them. Many became unregistered as voters because they didn't want their information out there. In fact, 1 of 4 eligible non-voters said the reason they're not registered to vote is because they want to keep their personal information private. Why does this matter? I mean, for us, maybe it's not a big deal, but for many, it's a big concern. Identity theft numbers are staggering. I've heard on many occasions from our Davis County attorney of the pervasive problem that we have in our state with people being targeted. With this information out there, those numbers continue to grow and the vulnerable population grows. In addition, elder abuse and victimization that's targeted to that population. Domestic violence victims. We heard a moving testimony during our committee hearing from a woman who had been a victim of abuse and had testified at a trial. The person who she had testified against had been incarcerated and was being released, and she was concerned that this individual would be able to track her down through her voter information record. And she's right. She ought to be concerned. The government should not require an individual to relinquish their right of privacy in order to exercise their right to vote. So how does the bill solve this problem? In a couple of ways. Number one, it adds the date of birth to the list of records that are classified as private. If you're pulling up the bill, it's on line 469, where it adds that to the list of other things like, let me just see, your driver's license number, your social security number, and adds it to that. And then secondly, it contains a provision for individuals to opt in to classify their voter registration information as private. And it does that in 4 different places in the bill. When you first register to vote, if you register on when you become fill out your driver's license, when you have a change of residence, and also a provisional ballot. So there has been concern in the past about the balance between the public's right to information and a citizen's right to privacy. I think this bill actually hits the right balance because it allows people to make the determination on their own if they'd like to protect that record for themselves. It also allows everyone to be ensured that their private date of birth will be automatically protected. And I think it's simple. This is something that people are asking for, and it does no harm to our commitment towards fair elections and the ability for Lieutenant Governor's office to do their job. In fact, they're supportive of this effort, and I believe strongly that an individual should not have to trade in their constitutional right to vote in order to ensure their right to privacy. And that concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Is there discussion to first substitute House Bill 302? Representative Hutchings.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to rise and strongly support the sponsors of this piece of legislation. I think it's interesting how sometimes we have to get kicked in the teeth to do the right thing. Any of you who have followed this topic for a while will recognize that to some degree. I myself sponsored a similar bill about 6 or 7 years ago, only to be dragged out these center doors right here and pretty much get lashed around by our own political parties saying, "What are you doing? You are interrupting the process. We have to have this vital information." Well, I think it's interesting that we've gotten to a point now in the state of Utah and in the nation where people are recognizing that government's reckless use of their personal information is getting a little out of hand. I've had the opportunity to experience it firsthand. There is another Eric Hutchings living in Dallas, Texas. Stole my identity about 18 months ago. Took my tax returns this last year, has racked up about $80,000 worth of all kinds of credit and stuff like that. I am just crazy frustrated that we could have prevented this. We could have solved this. We have the power to protect people. And when we sit around and we're debating all kinds of ways to change the electoral process because people don't want to participate. Well, I'll point to one great big giant one right here. People don't want to participate because we ask them to put everything on that voter identity sheet that we know we're going to sell off to the public that can be used absolutely to steal their identities. I've had it. I've experienced it. I'm still dealing with it. I had to go through and do all kinds of stuff this last year to try and explain. I had over 800 credit 2 years ago. I'm now just below 600. And we take this information, representatives, we have got to learn to protect the confidence of the people who deal with us on a daily basis. We had a breach in the health department. People got fired over it. It was horrible, awful. Well, we do it with voter records. And we refused to protect them years ago when we could have. This is late coming. It is absolutely the right thing. It was the right thing we should have done years ago. And we have to put a lot more focus and emphasis on protecting people's confidence in us to protect them against the nefarious people that are out there on the planet. And is it a bit of an inconvenience? Yes. But I'm telling you, again, with all of the debate we're going to have about how do we get people out to vote, let's completely change the process for how we do this, when it may be just as simple that when you really get down to the numbers, people just don't want everybody on planet Earth knowing everything about them just so that they can have the right to vote. So, obviously, pretty passionate about it. It's the right thing to do. We should have done it a long time ago. But as other bills come up, please be sensitive to the fact that when we put information out there that allows someone to steal your identity, like mine has been stolen, and I'm not saying it was off of this list. I don't know how they found it, but they had everything. My birthday, my social security, my address, my cell phone number. They had everything. We have to protect the people and keep the confidence in the people that the government is not going to put them in a vulnerable position. So on this bill, please support this bill. And on other bills, as you're working on stuff related to it, please be sensitive to the fact that people do, in fact, get hurt when we don't properly protect their personal identification. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Perry?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also stand in support of this and want to clarify. The reason my name is up there on the board for this is because I originally been working with the good representative from Davis County. I originally filed a bill on this when I got reached out by a constituent that brought my attention to this UtahVoters.com website and was concerned about her public information being out there and available for everybody. And I do want to let you know that we have done some good things as a legislature. We've removed the Social Security number from there that was there before. We did that step. Interestingly enough, we didn't take the date of birth off, but we excluded that they can't have their email addresses. Now I can have 15 different email addresses, and those are all over the place. I only have one date of birth, and that concerns me that we haven't gone down that road as well. And the real concerning issue to this whole point, why I brought this bill forward, and then I've given it to the good representative from Davis County because, as the good representative from Western Salt Lake County just pointed out, as well as the representative from Davis County, this is not just a one-time issue. This has not just come up once. It's been brought up time and time again. And the good representative from Davis County has worked very hard on this bill and on this issue for a number of years. And so as this bill came forward, I realized I had a bill going forward. It was a little bit further ahead than hers. I felt like this was a good opportunity to have one bill, consolidate. We don't need all those bills out here. So the two of us worked together, we've merged it, and we've signed it over into her name at this point, and I've signed on as a co-sponsor. But I do strongly believe in this, and we did some research. If you get on Twitter and you go in there and you type in Utah voter privacy, you'll see some really interesting comments from the public out there about the fact that we don't have good Utah voter privacy. And then the interesting thing for me was not only did we find out that this individual had purchased this list and put it out for the whole public purview, and suddenly we had a huge problem, but then the media got a hold of it. And of course, you've all been contacted by constituents, I'm sure, at this point, and you probably, if it wouldn't take very long, with a little Google search, you could pull up all kinds of media stories on this issue. And interestingly enough, just a couple weeks ago, there was a story run by the media about how to avoid having too much personal information online. As you look at that story and then you look at the comments made by people, that is why this bill is so important. Because the comments made by people at the end of that report were things like, this story is useless information as when the state of Utah is going to sell our personal information to be posted on the internet. The best advice is not to register to vote in Utah. That's not the message we want to send to the registered voters, the people out there. Another one says, I totally agree. He says, I'm not registered to vote in Utah, and I never will be until I can be sure that my information is private and safe. And then the last comment I'll end on here is it said, our legislature is in session. How about asking our legislators to prohibit government entities from releasing our personal information without a court order? That's just one of the many comments we're getting from the people out there. I think as representatives of the people, we owe it to the people that put us here to protect their information, and I would ask for your support on this bill.
Representative Draxler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a question?
Representative Edwards, will you yield?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Representative, could you address how this bill interfaces with another bill making its way through the legislature, which is Senate Bill 36, and whether those two are compatible and how they can work together?
Absolutely. So Senate Bill 36, I think, has passed out of the House committee. And is probably, we're going to be hearing that at some point. And it allows for the use of the voter information by a certain group, and I'll list those individuals here in a second. And it also attributes a penalty associated with misuse or inappropriate use. So the entities that are allowed use within Senate Bill 36 to have this information, your voter information, are government officials, journalistic, political, scholarly, which are all mimicking a California law that has been in place for, I think, since 2004. And then it goes beyond that and includes healthcare providers, insurance companies or their representatives, and also financial institutions as well. So all of those entities would have access to this voter record. So could these two coincide? Absolutely, because that bill basically allows those groups to have access to the information. 302 says the voter date of birth remains as a private record, so that could continue. And it also says that a voter could have the capacity to opt out of having it be public. So they could, but I really think that it's important to have the safeguards that are in 302 because there's just a lot in Senate Bill 36, a lot of access to that information that I think most people are not comfortable with.
May I follow up, Madam Speaker? I would urge the body to pay close attention to these two bills. This bill in question today, House Bill 302, must pass in order for us to ever consider Senate Bill 136. Excuse me, Senate Bill 36. There are loopholes in the Senate bill. We heard the bill in government operations yesterday, and while it does some good things, it also leaves open some very significant loopholes that this bill we're discussing right now will close, at least partially. If we think voter privacy is significant, we need to not only pass this bill today, but I believe we should wait till it passes the Senate before we pass Senate Bill 36. So I urge your support, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Anderegg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to reserve the right to make a motion.
If that's a motion to amend, you can reserve that right.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Would the sponsor yield to a question?
Representative Edwards, will you yield?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So is the bill, as I've just been reviewing it now for the third or fourth time, really primarily protecting just the date of birth or all of the information, meaning that person voted in this election and that election? Is that information also going to be protected and made not available?
The bill does two things. It automatically provides that the date of birth is classified as a private record, similar to your driver's license or social security number.
So it would be removed.
It's removed.
Good.
And then the second piece is that it says to every single person who's registering to vote, do you want this information to be public or not? It's an opt-in to making it private. So the assumption is that it is public information, and there will be verbiage that is in the bill on those lines that I referenced that says, do you want this information to be public? If they check no, then that entire record is off.
Including all of their history?
Yes.
Okay. I am actually very much in support of this bill with that point of clarification. I believed if it was a blanket that the records were gone unless you opted to allow them to be was what my concern was, quite frankly. If it's, hey, I don't want this information to be out there, period. My concern was that obviously each of us have to run an election. Each of us, I shouldn't say each of us, some of us may be independently wealthy. I am not. And from that standpoint, I didn't have time or money to go and convert people to believe in Jake Anderegg. I just didn't have the time, the resources, the money. I just couldn't do it. So the information was valuable to me, not necessarily their date of birth. In fact, even though it's been on there, I've never even looked at it. What was valuable to me was knowing that that person voted in X, Y, and Z elections. The information, just so the public is aware, doesn't say how they voted, just that they voted. And with that information, I was able to go through and kind of create my target list of who I needed to talk to, that low-hanging fruit. Because I didn't have the money to go and convert people to vote. I had to go and get the people who were already going to vote. And from that standpoint, the information is very valuable to our existing political process. However, the information needs to be safeguarded. From that standpoint, I absolutely support this bill and thank the sponsor, along with including the opt-in provision, which makes that information private. I think this is a great bill, and we should strongly support it and pass it out. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Chavez-Hauk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a question?
Representative Edwards, will you yield?
Yes.
Go ahead.
My question relates similarly to questioning that was just presented by the good representative from Utah County. And it relates more to looking at the voter files as a whole, the record as a whole, and being able to establish, for example, if there are cases of voter fraud. And I'm wondering if excluding the birth date from those records in any way compromises the record as a whole in terms of being able to validate which voters are whom.
My understanding is we have raised this issue and discussed it at length with the Lieutenant Governor's office, for whom that is one of their main tasks, is to ensure the veracity of elections, is that they can accomplish that same goal of ensuring that there is not voter fraud using other mechanisms, including the voter ID number.
Thank you. And I'm also curious as to, I appreciate your concern with the issue of birth date, but I'm wondering why within the context of the bill we didn't address issues related to access to that internet list, i.e. the penalties that are present in SB 36.
That's just something that we have not addressed, is the penalties associated with that, because we have felt like if there is a very clearly delineated usage here, then, especially as it relates to the voter birth date, that will not have an ability to get out because it will be protected. And in terms of the existing website that has published that entire database, there are already attorneys, county attorneys, who have stated their willingness to look at this issue in terms of exploring how to force through legal avenues the removal of that list and to prosecute under the proposed statute, HB 302, what would be considered an inappropriate use of that, publishing that.
All right, thank you. An additional question, if I might, Madam Speaker. So a couple of individuals have gotten on this floor and have expressed grave concern regarding use of voter information to commit fraud. And even notably, our good colleague from Kearns noted that he had been recently a victim of voter fraud, but didn't really know what that could be attributed to. Do we have data that is able to correlate the use of voter files to voter fraud, and what might that look like?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
I'm sorry. I guess what I'm trying to ascertain is, do we have a direct correlation between access to voter files and fraud that is of concern to this body and our constituents?
You know, I think that it's difficult to thread that backwards and find out exactly where the information has been leaked from. But I can tell you that for many individuals, they like to look at this from the opposite direction and say, can you prove that it is not being used in that way? Can we prove that this information is not being used to target vulnerable populations such as domestic violence victims and elderly? Can we prove that it is not being inappropriately used for commercial purposes? And I think in many cases, especially the commercial purposes, we can connect those dots very easily. And with the others, you know, the release of the data that has come from the state of Utah in many cases, or the Target release of data. Can we prove exactly where that came from? Well, I think in this case, the answer is unless we can prove that we as a state can accurately and convincingly protect this information for our voters, then I think we need to act on this issue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I appreciate the concern that all of our constituents have expressed to us upon the recent findings in the media reports related to the abuse of this website and in relaying our constituents' information, and do compliment the sponsor for her efforts in trying to tackle this challenge of voter fraud. Notably, I did support the bill in committee. Having heard, though, SB 36 in committee also, I would disagree with my colleague from Northern Utah related to the need that we have to have both of these bills in place. I believe that the other bill that we will have an opportunity to hear addresses what I believe is the main challenge, which is what happens to this information and how does the government sell this outright? How do other individuals access this information? And would caution moving forward in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Representative Notwell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a question?
Representative Edwards, will you yield?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Representative, first let me just compliment you on tackling this tough issue. We've probably all likely heard from our constituents, and it's important that we focus on privacy. I just have one question with regard to your bill. Is there a particular reason why you didn't default to having the record private and requesting that someone opt in to make it public rather than the other way around?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that we would have to have every single person in the state go back and re-register as voters under that opt. You have to be careful of the way you say it, to opt into making your record public. So if the assumption is that the record remains private, then that is an additional cost for the state to go and reach out to every single voter. As it is, as in the bill, with the assumption that the record is public unless you opt into making it private, the onus is on the individual either as they come in to register for the first time or on an existing registered voter to contact the county clerk's office and make that change.
Okay. So I would submit that most voters probably expect their record to be private anyway. And so, I appreciate that you're taking the time to tackle this issue, and I'm in full support of the bill. We should be a little stronger on that aspect, but thanks for doing that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Layton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to rise in support of this bill. It was one of the first things this session that I started hearing constituent complaints on, and I just think that as some of this information may be available out there in other places. But that being said, we, the government, should not be the source of that information and sharing people's private information. I think that we have a stewardship and an obligation to protect the privacy and the trust of the citizens of Utah, and I encourage you to support this bill.
Seeing no further lights, Representative Edwards for summation.
Thank you. I do appreciate the efforts made by the Senate sponsor on SB 36, and I do think that there has been a tremendous conversation that has ensued as part of that. My concern remains, though, about the existing loopholes there. I can see how it could complement this bill, but to think that we are getting to where we can achieve a level of confidence in our voters with Senate Bill 36 alone would be inaccurate. I think they need to go together, certainly to achieve the will of the people and what they're asking for. I appreciate Representative Perry's work on this and the work that has been done on this issue throughout the years. So I will just briefly reiterate to you that it's simple. This is something the people are asking for. that if you could remember the proper role of government and the right of privacy versus the right to vote, and after you finish voting yes on this bill, if you would like to check out the site utahvoters.com or come get the copy so you can know who to send out birthday cards to and exactly how old everyone is in the body, I've got copies for you here if you'd like to come pick those up. That concludes. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. Voting is open on first substitute House Bill 302. Representative D. Appears that all present have voted. Voting will be closed. First substitute House Bill 302. Having received 71 yes votes, 2 no votes, passes the House, will be transmitted to the Senate for its consideration. Representatives, we have an item on the time certain calendar. Madam Reading Clerk.
House Bill 346, Foster Children Amendments, Representative Johnny Anderson. This bill was heard in Health and Human Services with a vote of 702.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representatives, I have the pleasure of chairing the Legislative Child Welfare Oversight Panel, and